The sound of sobbing carried through the tall pines like a wounded animal calling out in distress, and Nathaniel Quinn stopped his horse mid-stride to listen. He had been tracking a bull elk for the better part of 3 days through the Montana Territory wilderness, his buckskin shirt dark with sweat, despite the cool October air of 1878, but something about those desperate cries made him forget all about the hunt. His broad shoulders tensed beneath the worn leather as he guided his horse toward the sound, his calloused hands steady on the reins despite the uncertainty ahead. The clearing opened up before him like a secret garden carved from the wilderness, and there she sat on a rough-hewn stump outside a small cabin, her face buried in her hands. A broken spinning wheel lay scattered in pieces at her feet, the delicate spokes splintered like broken bones. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung around her face in waves, and her shoulders shook with the force of her tears. Nathaniel dismounted quietly, his muscled frame moving with surprising grace for a man of his size, his boots making soft sounds against the forest floor. "Miss," he said gently, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. "Are you hurt?" She looked up with a gasp, her tear-stained face turning toward him. Her eyes were the color of whiskey in firelight, golden brown and wide with surprise. For a moment, she just stared at him, taking in his imposing figure, the way his long dark hair brushed past his shoulders, the thick muscles of his arms visible beneath his shirt, the weeks of beard growth shadowing his strong jaw. He must have looked like a bear of a man emerging from the woods, but something in his expression must have reassured her because she did not run. "I am fine," she said, her voice catching. "Just foolish. I did not mean to make such a scene." Nathaniel glanced at the broken spinning wheel, understanding dawning in his sharp blue eyes. "That does not look fine to me. Mind if I take a look?" She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "You cannot fix it. The wheel rim cracked clean through when I was working, and the whole thing just fell apart. I saved for 2 years to buy this wheel, and now winter is coming and I have 3 bags of wool that need spinning and no way to do it." He knelt beside the scattered pieces, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he examined each part. The cabin behind her was small but well-maintained, with smoke curling from the chimney and a neat vegetable garden along the south side. A widow, he guessed, or perhaps a woman trying to make her own way. Either situation was difficult in this harsh country, especially as winter approached. "I have some tools in my saddlebag," he said, looking up at her, "and I have fixed more than a few things in my time. Would you mind if I tried?" Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed different, softer. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because I can," he said simply, "and because nobody should have to cry alone in the woods." She nodded slowly, and he saw her swallow hard before speaking. "My name is Theodora Zimmerman. Everyone calls me Thea. Nathaniel Quinn. Most folks call me Nate when they call me anything at all." He offered her a small smile and watched as the corner of her mouth lifted slightly in response. He retrieved his tools and set to work, his broad back bent over the scattered pieces of the spinning wheel. Thea watched him for a long moment before disappearing into the cabin. She emerged carrying a tin cup of water, which she offered to him. He drank gratefully, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, settling back onto the stump. "In the mountains." "Near about 8 years now. I came out after the war, needed someplace quiet." His hands kept working as he spoke, sorting the pieces into piles, examining the crack in the wheel rim. "The war," she repeated softly. "My husband went to fight. He did not come back." Nathaniel looked up at her, seeing the old pain in her eyes. "I am sorry for your loss." "It has been 5 years now. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I came out here 2 years ago. My brother had a claim up near Wallace, and he said I could have this piece of land if I wanted to try homesteading. He helped me build the cabin before he moved on to the Idaho Territory. Wallace is about 15 miles south of here, Nathaniel said. That is a long way to be on your own. I manage, she said, lifting her chin slightly. Or at least I did until my spinning wheel broke. I take wool into town to sell once I have spun it into yarn. The ladies there pay good money for it, and it keeps me fed through the winter, but without the wheel. She did not finish the sentence, but she did not need to. Nathaniel understood the mathematics of survival in the wilderness. No yarn meant no money meant no supplies, and winter in Montana Territory did not forgive poor planning. He examined the cracked wheel rim more closely, running his fingers along the split wood. I cannot fix this piece, he admitted, but I can make you a new one if you have the right wood. Her face fell. I do not have money to pay you. Did not ask for money, he said, meeting her eyes. You have any ash or oak nearby? There is an ash tree that came down in a storm last month, just past the creek. That will work. It will take me a few days, but I can fashion a new rim and get this wheel working again. Thea stared at him as if he had offered her the moon. You would do that? Stay here and work on it. I would, he said. If you do not mind the company, I can camp down by the creek, stay out of your way. No, she said quickly, then blushed. I mean, you do not have to camp by the creek. I have a small barn where I keep my goat and chickens. There is room for your horse and a space where you could sleep if you wanted. It is not much, but it is dry and warmer than a tent. Nathaniel considered her offer, noting the hope in her eyes and the way she twisted her hands together. He should probably decline, should maintain proper distance, but something about this woman with her tear-stained face and her broken dreams made him want to stay. That is kind of you, he said. I accept. The relief that washed over her face was almost palpable. She stood up quickly. Let me show you where to put your horse. Are you hungry? I have stew from yesterday, and I could warm it up. That sounds mighty fine, he admitted, suddenly aware of how long it had been since he had eaten a proper meal. Trail rations sustained a man, but they did not nourish him, not in the ways that mattered. He led his horse to the small barn, noting the tidy way she kept everything. The goat bleated at him curiously from her pen, and a handful of chickens scratched in the dirt outside. It was a modest setup, but it was clear she worked hard to maintain it. He unsaddled his horse and rubbed the animal down before giving it water and a bit of grain from his supplies. When he entered the cabin, he had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. The interior was small but warm, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall and a narrow bed tucked in the corner. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined the walls holding jars of preserved foods, dishes, and various household items. Everything was clean and orderly, the mark of someone who took pride in their home despite its modest size. Thea ladled stew into a bowl and set it before him at the table. The smell made his stomach growl audibly, and she smiled at the sound. When did you last eat? She asked. Had some jerky this morning, he said, but nothing hot in a few days. She shook her head and ladled out a second bowl for herself, then cut thick slices from a loaf of bread. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the scrape of spoons against bowls. This is good, Nathaniel said finally. Real good. Thank you. Cooking for one gets lonely if I am being honest. It is nice to have someone to feed. She paused, seeming to realize what she had said. I mean, I do not usually have visitors. Living this far from town, most people do not come by. Isolation has its benefits, he said, but it can be hard too. Do you get lonely up in the mountains? The question was direct, and Nathaniel appreciated her honesty. Sometimes, he admitted, but I got used to my own company. After the war, I needed the quiet. Needed space to think without all the noise of civilization pressing in. I understand that, Thea said softly. After James died, everyone in our town wanted to tell me how to grieve, what to do next, how to move on. Coming out here, being alone, it gave me room to feel what I needed to feel without everyone watching. How old were you when he died? 20. We had only been married a year. She looked down at her bowl. I am 25 now. Sometimes I feel ancient, like I have lived 100 years. You look young to me, Nathaniel said, then cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how that might sound. I just mean you have a lot of life ahead of you still. She looked up at him, a ghost of a smile on her lips. How old are you? 29. Feel about 100 myself most days. The war and everything after. He did not elaborate and she did not press, which he appreciated. After they finished eating, Nathaniel went back outside to examine the fallen ash tree Thea had mentioned. The light was starting to fade, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. He found the tree easily enough and selected a section that would work for the wheel rim. It would take careful work to shape it properly, but he had time and the skill to do it right. When he returned to the cabin to retrieve more tools, Thea was outside drawing water from the well. Her face was cleaner now, the tear tracks washed away, and she had repinned her hair more securely. In the fading light, he could see that she was pretty in an understated way, with fine features and a determined set to her jaw that spoke of inner strength. I will start on this tomorrow, he said, indicating the wood. Tonight I will see what I can do to repair the smaller pieces of the wheel. Some of them just need a bit of glue and clamping. You really know what you are doing, she said, watching him. My father was a carpenter back in Pennsylvania. I grew up learning the trade. Never thought those skills would matter much when I headed west, but they have come in handy more times than I can count. Why did you come west? Nathaniel set down his tools and looked out at the darkening mountains. Seemed like the thing to do after the war. I had seen enough of cities and crowds, enough of people and their problems. Wanted to see what was out here, wanted to test myself against something honest. A mountain does not lie to you. A river does not pretend to be something it is not. There is a purity to it that I needed. Thea nodded slowly. I think I understand that. Out here you succeed or fail based on your own efforts. There is no one to blame, no one to rely on but yourself. It is terrifying and freeing all at once. Exactly, he said, surprised by how well she had articulated what he felt. They stood together in the gathering darkness, and Nathaniel felt something shift inside him, some wall he had built after the war beginning to crack. This woman understood isolation and self-reliance, understood the need for space and silence, but she also understood the cost of it. He could see it in her eyes when she talked about cooking for one, could hear it in her voice when she mentioned the loneliness. I should let you get some rest, he said finally. Thank you for the meal and the barn. Thank you for stopping, she said. For not just riding past when you heard me crying. I could not have done that, he said honestly. Would have haunted me, wondering if you were all right. She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. Good night, Nate. Good night, Thea. He retreated to the barn and made himself a comfortable bed in the hay, his horse nickering softly nearby. Through the cracks in the barn walls, he could see the light from the cabin window, could imagine Thea moving about inside, preparing for bed. He had not slept near another person in years, had not wanted to, but somehow her presence nearby felt right rather than intrusive. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of dark hair and whiskey-colored eyes. Morning arrived with the sound of a rooster crowing and the goat demanding to be milked. Nathaniel rose and stretched, his muscles protesting slightly from sleeping on the ground, though he had certainly endured worse. He splashed water on his face from the trough outside and ran his fingers through his long hair, tying it back with a leather cord. When he emerged from the barn, Thea was already outside, tending to her chickens. She wore a different dress today, a faded blue that brought out the gold in her eyes, and she had covered her hair with a worn scarf. "Good morning," she called. "I am making breakfast if you are hungry." "I could eat," he admitted, walking over to join her. Inside, she served him eggs from her chickens and more of the bread from yesterday, along with fresh goat milk. It was simple fare but satisfying, and they ate together as morning light streamed through the cabin windows. "I thought I would work on the wheel rim today," he said. "I will need to soak the wood and then steam it to bend it into shape. It will take most of the day." "Can I help?" she asked. "If you want to, it would be good to have an extra set of hands when it comes time to bend the wood." They worked together through the morning, Nathaniel shaping the ash wood with careful precision while Thea prepared the steaming setup. He had built a simple frame from green branches and positioned a large pot of water over a fire. As the wood soaked and then steamed, he explained what he was doing and why, and she listened intently, asking intelligent questions. "You could do this yourself if you had to," he said at one point. "It is not complicated, just takes patience and the right tools." "I never learned much about woodworking," she admitted. "James handled that sort of thing, and after he died, I just muddled through as best I could. My brother helped when he was here, but now—" She trailed off with a shrug. "You do well on your own," Nathaniel said. "This place is well maintained. That is not easy." She flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "I try. Some days are harder than others, but I am stubborn." "Stubborn is good out here. Stubborn keeps you alive." When the wood was ready, they worked together to bend it into the circular shape needed for the wheel rim. It was delicate work, requiring constant adjustment and pressure, and they stood close together, their hands working in tandem. Nathaniel was acutely aware of her presence beside him, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the determined set of her jaw as she concentrated. "There," he said finally, securing the wood in place to hold its new shape. "Now it needs to dry overnight, and tomorrow I can fit it to the wheel." They stepped back to admire their work, and Thea's face lit up with accomplishment. "We did it," she said, turning to him with a brilliant smile. "I cannot believe we actually did it." "You did well," he said. "Steady hands." "I had a good teacher." They returned to the cabin for lunch, and Thea made sandwiches from cold meat and more of her bread. As they ate, she asked him about his life in the mountains, and he found himself talking more than he had in years, describing the changing seasons, the animals he hunted, the isolated beauty of the high country. "It sounds wonderful," she said wistfully. "I would love to see it someday." "You could," he said, "if you wanted to." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, an understanding or perhaps a possibility. Thea looked away first, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I should work on my mending," she said, standing up. "I have been putting it off for days." "And I should check my traps," Nathaniel said, though he had no trap set. He just needed some space to think, to process the strange feeling stirring in his chest. He spent the afternoon walking through the forest, ostensibly scouting for game but really just trying to clear his head. He had not expected to feel anything when he stopped to help this woman. He had thought he would fix her spinning wheel and move on, just another good deed in a hard world. But something about Thea called to him, something beyond her pretty face or her obvious need for help. She was strong in a way he respected, resilient and independent. But she was also soft in places, vulnerable in ways that made him want to protect her. He thought about her crying over the broken wheel, about the desperation in her voice when she talked about winter coming, about the loneliness she admitted to feeling. He understood all of it because he felt it too, even if he had grown so accustomed to isolation that he sometimes forgot what it was like to crave human connection. When he returned to the cabin that evening, Thea was sitting outside on her stump again, but this time she was mending a shirt, her needle flashing in the fading light. She looked up when he approached and smiled, and he felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "Productive afternoon?" she asked. "Walked mostly," he admitted. "Cleared my head. I do that sometimes too. The forest is good for thinking." He sat down on the ground near her, his back against the cabin wall, and watched as she worked. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, and he found himself mesmerized by the simple domesticity of the scene. "Tell me about your family," he said after a while. She paused in her sewing. "Not much to tell. My parents died of fever when I was young, and I was raised by my aunt in Ohio. She was kind but strict. When I was 19, I met James at a church social, and we were married 6 months later. He was a good man, kind and hardworking. When the war started, he felt it was his duty to go. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was determined." "What happened to him?" "Shiloh," she said softly. "He wrote me letters right up until a week before the battle, talking about how he would be home soon, how we would start a family. Then the letters stopped, and a month later I received word that he had been killed. They did not send his body home. He is buried somewhere in Tennessee with hundreds of other young men who thought they were doing the right thing." Nathaniel heard the old grief in her voice, the anger mixed with sorrow. "The war took a lot of good men," he said. "I am sorry it took yours. You fought too." "Where?" "All over. Virginia mostly, toward the end. I was at Gettysburg." He did not elaborate on the horrors he had witnessed there, the things he had done and seen. Some memories were better left buried. "How did you survive when so many others did not?" It was a blunt question, but he appreciated her directness. "Luck mostly. And the fact that I stopped caring whether I lived or died somewhere around the 2nd year. Funny how that can keep you alive when caring too much gets you killed." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand that too. After James died, there was a period where I just existed. I did not care what happened to me. It was not until I came out here that I started to feel alive again, started to want things." "What do you want?" he asked, genuinely curious. Thea was quiet for a long moment, her needle still. "I want to feel safe," she said finally. "I want to build something lasting, something that is mine. I want to stop being afraid all the time that winter will come and I will not have enough, or that some animal will get my goat, or that I will get sick with no one around to help. I want—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I want not to be alone anymore." The raw honesty of her answer hit him hard. He stood up and moved closer, sitting down on the ground beside her stump. "You are brave," he said. "Braver than most men I knew in the war, coming out here alone, building this life that takes courage." "I do not feel brave," she admitted. "I feel scared most of the time. Bravery is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear." She looked down at him, and in the fading light her eyes seemed to glow. "Where did you learn to be so wise?" "The hard way, like everyone else." She laughed softly at that, and the sound was like music. They sat together as darkness fell, and Nathaniel found himself telling her stories from his years in the mountains, about the bears he had encountered and the storms he had weathered, about the pristine lakes high in the peaks where he sometimes camped for days at a time. "It sounds lonely," she said when he finished. "It is," he admitted. "But I told myself I preferred it that way." "And do you?" He looked up at her, at the way the lamplight from inside the cabin illuminated her face. I am not so sure anymore." The next morning, Nathaniel woke early and checked on the wheel rim. It had dried well overnight, holding its circular shape perfectly. He carried it to where the rest of the spinning wheel pieces lay and began the careful work of assembly. Thea joined him after breakfast, sitting nearby with more mending, her presence comfortable and companionable. "Tell me about spinning," he said as he worked. "I know the basics, but I have never understood the appeal." Thea smiled. "There is something meditative about it," she said. "You take this raw, messy fleece, and you clean it and card it and then slowly transform it into something useful, something beautiful. Every twist of the wheel, every pull of the fiber, you are creating something from almost nothing. It makes me feel connected to all the women who have done this work before me, going back hundreds of years. Your mother spun. No, my aunt taught me. She said every woman should know how to make the things her family needs. I think she was right, even though I do not have a family anymore." "You could," Nathaniel said quietly. "Have a family, I mean. You are still young." "So people keep telling me," she said with a sigh. "But finding a husband out here is not exactly easy. The men in Wallace are either already married, too old, or looking for someone younger and prettier." "Any man would be lucky to have you," he said, then immediately felt heat rise to his face. He bent back over the wheel, focusing intently on fitting the new rim. "That is kind of you to say," Thea said softly. They worked in silence after that, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Nathaniel found himself hyper-aware of every sound she made, every small sigh or shift of position. His feelings were becoming clearer by the hour, though he was not sure what to do with them. He had no business courting anyone, not with his isolated lifestyle and rough ways. What could he offer a woman like Thea beyond hard work and the occasional companionship? By midday, he had the wheel rim fitted and secured. The rest of the assembly went smoothly, and by late afternoon, the spinning wheel stood complete once more, looking almost as good as new. "Try it," he said, stepping back. Thea approached the wheel almost reverently, running her hands over the smooth wood. She sat down, positioned some prepared wool, and began to work. The wheel turned smoothly, the familiar rhythm clearly comforting to her. After a few minutes, she stopped and looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "It works perfectly," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Nate, I cannot thank you enough. You have saved me." "You would have figured something out," he said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No," she said firmly. "I would have tried, but I would have failed. I do not have the skills you have, and I do not have the money to buy a new wheel. This winter would have been—" She did not finish the sentence, but they both knew what she meant. "I am glad I could help," he said simply. She stood up and walked over to him, and before he knew what she intended, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. He froze for a moment, unused to being touched, but then his arms came up almost of their own accord and wrapped around her. She was small against his broad chest, her head barely reaching his shoulder, and she smelled like lavender and wood smoke. He felt her shaking slightly and realized she was crying again, but these were different tears than the ones that had first drawn him to her. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for stopping, for staying, for caring." "Thea," he said, his voice rough. He wanted to say more but did not have the words. She pulled back and looked up at him, her face streaked with fresh tears. "Stay for dinner at least," she said. "Let me cook you a proper meal before you go." The word "go" hit him like a physical blow. Of course he would have to leave. The wheel was fixed, his job was done, and he had no reason to linger. But the thought of riding away, of returning to his solitary existence in the mountains, suddenly felt unbearable. "I will stay for dinner," he said. "And I should probably stay one more night to make sure the wheel is working properly. Sometimes things need adjustment after the first use." It was a flimsy excuse and they both knew it, but Thea nodded eagerly. Yes, that makes sense. You should definitely stay and make sure everything is working right. That evening, Thea cooked the best meal she could manage with her limited supplies. She had been saving a chicken for a special occasion, and she decided this qualified. She roasted it with vegetables from her garden and made biscuits that came out golden and fluffy. Nathaniel watched her work, helping where he could, and they talked about everything and nothing. "What will you do when winter comes?" she asked as they ate. "Hole up in my cabin up in the high country," he said. "I have supplies enough to last, and I will trap and hunt as needed. Mostly I will wait for spring." "That sounds incredibly lonely." "It is," he admitted. "But I have books to read and work to do. I tan hides and make repairs, things that keep my hands busy. Do you ever think about living differently? Maybe closer to town where there are other people?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I used to think I preferred the isolation," he said slowly. "But these past few days, being here with you, it has reminded me what I have been missing." "What is that?" "Connection," he said simply. "Purpose beyond just surviving, someone to talk to at the end of the day." Thea's eyes were bright in the lamplight. "I know exactly what you mean." After dinner, they sat outside again, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The temperature was dropping, a reminder that winter was not far off. Nathaniel had built up the fire and they sat close to its warmth, shoulders nearly touching. "I do not want you to go," Thea said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel's heart hammered in his chest. "I do not want to go either." "Then why do you have to?" "Because I do not know what else to do. I am a mountain man, Thea. I do not know how to be anything else. I have no land, no home except a rough cabin miles from anywhere. I cannot offer you anything." "You could offer me yourself," she said, turning to look at him. "That would be enough." He stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You barely know me." "I know enough," she said. "I know you stopped to help a crying stranger. I know you worked for days to fix something you gained nothing from fixing. I know you are kind and skilled and strong. I know that when you are here, I do not feel alone, and I have not felt that way since before James died. I know that the thought of you leaving makes me want to cry all over again." Nathaniel reached out and took her hand, his large, calloused fingers engulfing her smaller ones. "I am not an easy man," he warned. "I am rough and I have habits that would probably drive you crazy. I do not talk much and I have nightmares sometimes from the war. I do not know the first thing about courting a woman properly." "I do not need proper," Thea said fiercely. "I need real. I need honest. I need someone who will not leave me alone to face the world." "I could do that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you would have me, I could stay. I could help you work this land, could make sure you never have to cry over a broken spinning wheel again. I could." He paused, gathering courage. "I could love you if you would let me." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes to all of it." He pulled her closer, and she came willingly, settling against his chest as his arms wrapped around her. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. Nathaniel felt something settle inside him, some restless ache finally quieting. This was what he had been searching for without knowing it, not just solitude but connection, not just survival but purpose. "What happens now?" Thea asked eventually. "Now I stay," he said simply. "I will need to go back to my cabin to get my things, but I will come back. If you will have me, I will make my home here with you." "I will have you," she said, tilting her face up to look at him. "I will gladly have you." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. She responded eagerly, her hands coming up to tangle in his long hair, and he felt desire surge through him mixed with tenderness. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I should probably sleep in the barn tonight," he said reluctantly. "Probably," she agreed, though neither of them moved. Eventually, propriety won out and Nathaniel retreated to the barn, but he carried the memory of her kiss with him like a talisman. He barely slept, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He would need to make arrangements, would need to figure out how to combine his life with hers, but for the first time in years, the future felt bright instead of merely inevitable. The next morning, they made their plans over breakfast. Nathaniel would ride back to his cabin, a journey of about 2 days, and collect his possessions. He would return within a week, and then they would begin the process of building a life together. They decided to wait until spring to marry properly, to give themselves time to adjust to living together and to make sure this sudden connection was real and lasting. "I know it is real," Thea said, "but I understand being cautious." "It is not caution," Nathaniel said. "It is wanting to do right by you. You deserve a proper courtship, proper respect. I will not have people in town saying I took advantage." "No one will say that. They might. A widow living alone, a strange mountain man showing up. People talk, and I do not want your reputation damaged." She smiled at his old-fashioned concern. "All right, we will wait until spring to marry, but you will stay here." "I will stay here," he confirmed. They spent the rest of the morning together, Nathaniel making small repairs around the property while Thea worked at her spinning wheel, transforming raw wool into smooth yarn. Every so often, their eyes would meet, and they would smile, giddy with the newness of their understanding. When it was time for him to leave, Nathaniel saddled his horse with reluctant movements. Thea stood nearby, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "1 week," he promised. "I will be back before you know it." "I will be counting the days," she said. He kissed her goodbye, a long, lingering kiss that left them both shaken, and then he mounted his horse. He looked down at her, memorizing her face the way the morning light caught in her dark hair. "Stay safe," she said. "You too. Keep the door barred at night." "I always do." He rode away slowly, looking back several times to see her standing there watching him. Each time, the distance between them hurt a little more, until finally she was out of sight and he was alone with the forest and his thoughts. The ride to his cabin passed in a blur of planning and remembering. He thought about the kiss, about the way she had felt in his arms, about the life they could build together. He had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it was like to have someone to think about, someone to plan for beyond himself. His cabin in the high country was exactly as he had left it, tucked into a narrow valley with a good view of the surrounding peaks. It was larger than Thea's cabin and better insulated against the harsh mountain winters, but it was also more remote, accessible only by narrow trails that became impassable under heavy snow. He understood immediately why combining their lives would mean staying at her place rather than bringing her up here. She had community nearby, land for farming, proximity to town for selling her yarn. His cabin would make a good summer retreat, but nothing more. He packed his belongings with care, sorting through years of accumulated possessions. Tools, clothes, books, trapping supplies, everything that made up his solitary life. Some things he would bring, others he would leave for now and retrieve later if needed. He worked methodically, his strong hands making quick work of the task. On the second day at his cabin, he hunted and brought down a young elk, a good prize that would provide meat for the journey and to share with Thea when he returned. He butchered it carefully, taking the best cuts and preparing them for travel. 3 days after leaving Thea, he began the journey back to her cabin. His horse was laden with supplies and his possessions, and he moved slowly through the forest trails, his mind already racing ahead to their reunion. He wondered if she was working at her spinning wheel, if she was thinking about him, if she had any doubts. A storm moved in on the second day of his return journey. Cold rain mixed with sleet that made the trails treacherous and visibility poor. Nathaniel pushed on anyway, driving himself and his horse harder than was wise. He needed to get back to Thea, needed to make sure she was all right, needed to see her face again. The storm had settled deep into his bones by the time her cabin came into view, and he was shaking with cold despite his heavy coat. Thea must have seen him coming because she burst out of the cabin and ran toward him, heedless of the rain. "You are back," she cried, her face radiant with joy. "I was so worried when the storm came in." He dismounted stiffly, his muscles protesting the long ride. "I am fine," he said, though his teeth were chattering, "just wet and cold." "Get inside," she ordered, taking his horse's reins. "I will see to your horse. You need to get warm." "I can handle the horse." "No, you cannot. You are half frozen. Inside now." He obeyed, too cold and tired to argue. Inside the cabin, the fire was burning bright and warm, and he stripped off his wet coat and shirt with shaking hands. Thea returned quickly, having settled his horse in the barn with practiced efficiency. She took one look at him and immediately began issuing orders. "Sit by the fire. I am going to make you something hot to drink." He sat, feeling the warmth slowly seep back into his bones. She brought him coffee laced with honey and a blanket to wrap around his shoulders. Her hands were gentle as she fussed over him, and he felt something inside him melt that had nothing to do with the fire. "You should not have pushed so hard to get back," she scolded, but her eyes were soft. "You could have waited out the storm." "I wanted to get back to you," he said simply. She knelt beside him, her hand on his knee. "I am glad you are here. I missed you terribly." "I missed you too. I could barely think of anything else." They stayed like that for a while, him warming by the fire while she sat beside him, their hands clasped together. Eventually, he stopped shaking and the color returned to his face. Thea made dinner while he changed into dry clothes, and they ate together as the storm raged outside, safe and warm inside the cabin. "I brought elk meat," he said. "Enough to last us through a good part of winter if we cure it properly." "We can work on that tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, you need to rest." But instead of resting, they talked late into the night, catching up on the days they had been apart. Thea told him about her work at the spinning wheel, about the yarn she had produced, and her plans to take it into Wallace soon. Nathaniel told her about his cabin and the things he had brought, about the plans he had been forming for improving her property. "Our property," she corrected gently. "Our property," he agreed, liking the sound of it. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. Nathaniel threw himself into improving the homestead, building a larger barn, reinforcing the cabin against winter, helping Thea with the endless tasks required for survival. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and in the evenings they sat together by the fire, talking or reading or simply enjoying each other's presence. Slowly, they learned each other's rhythms and habits. Nathaniel discovered that Thea was an early riser who liked to greet the dawn with a cup of coffee on the porch. Thea learned that Nathaniel sometimes woke from nightmares and needed space to calm himself. They navigated these discoveries with patience and growing affection, each day building on the foundation of trust they had established. When the first snow fell in early November, they were as ready as they could be. The barn was stocked with hay for the animals, the cabin was insulated and warm, and they had enough food preserved to last the winter. Nathaniel had also brought down 2 deer and prepared the meat, adding to their supplies. "We will be all right," he told Thea one evening as snow fell softly outside. "Better than all right." "I know," she said, leaning against him. "I am not afraid anymore. In late November, they made the journey into Wallace together. It was Thea's first trip to town since Nathaniel had arrived, and she was nervous about the questions and stares they would inevitably face. Wallace was a small town, barely more than a few dozen buildings clustered along a muddy main street, but it was the center of commerce for the scattered homesteaders and miners in the area. They went first to the general store, where Thea sold her yarn to Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman who ran the store with her husband. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened when she saw Nathaniel standing behind Thea, his large frame filling the small store. "Mrs. Zimmerman," she said carefully, "I see you have brought someone with you today." "Yes," Thea said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "This is Nathaniel Quinn. He has been helping me with the homestead, and he will be staying on permanently. We plan to marry in the spring." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose, but she was too polite to say anything unkind. "I see. Well, congratulations to you both. Your yarn is excellent as always, Mrs. Zimmerman. I will take all you have brought." They completed their business quickly, and then Nathaniel took Thea to the town's modest restaurant for lunch, a rare treat. Over plates of stew and fresh bread, she visibly relaxed, the tension leaving her shoulders. "That was not so bad," she said. "People will talk," Nathaniel warned. "But it does not matter. We know the truth of things." "I do not care what they say," Thea said firmly. "I am happier than I have been in years. They can think what they like." After lunch, they visited the land office to officially record Nathaniel's claim to half of Thea's homestead. The clerk was more openly curious than Mrs. Patterson, asking pointed questions about their arrangement, but Nathaniel answered with calm dignity until the man backed down. On the ride back to the cabin, as the sun set behind the mountains painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Thea reached over and took Nathaniel's hand. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For standing beside me, for not being ashamed or trying to hide what we are to each other." "I could never be ashamed of you," he said fiercely. "You are the best thing that has happened to me in more years than I can count." The winter deepened, snow piling high around the cabin and transforming the landscape into a white wonderland. They were snowed in for days at a time, but neither of them minded. The forced proximity only deepened their connection, and they fell into comfortable routines that felt like they had been together for years, rather than months. Nathaniel taught Thea how to tan hides and preserve meat, how to read weather signs and predict coming storms. Thea taught him the finer points of cooking and mending, skills he had neglected during his years alone. They read to each other in the evenings from Nathaniel's small collection of books, everything from Shakespeare to practical guides on farming. On Christmas Eve, Nathaniel surprised Thea with a gift he had been secretly working on for weeks. He presented her with a beautifully carved chest made from cedar, the lid decorated with an intricate pattern of leaves and flowers. "For your yarn and spinning supplies," he said, suddenly shy. "I know you have been storing everything in sacks, and I thought—" "It is beautiful," Thea breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Nate, this is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me. I am glad you like it." She kissed him then, a deep kiss full of passion and promise. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with emotion. "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving a package wrapped in brown paper. "It is not as grand as your gift, but I hope you like it." Inside was a new shirt she had sewn, made from wool she had spun and woven herself. It was dark blue, the color of the evening sky, and the stitching was perfect. "I love it," he said honestly. "And I love that you made it yourself. I will treasure it." They spent the rest of Christmas Eve talking and laughing, and when midnight came and Christmas Day arrived, Nathaniel held her close and whispered, "This is the best Christmas I have ever had." "Mine too," she agreed. The new year arrived quietly, just the two of them watching the stars from the cabin porch, bundled in blankets against the cold. Nathaniel made a resolution to build Thea a proper house before the next winter, something larger with separate rooms and glass windows. Thea resolved to expand her spinning business and perhaps try raising sheep for their wool. "We have a future," she said wonderingly. "A real future together." "We do," he agreed, "and it is going to be good." January and February passed in a blur of snow and cold, but they weathered it together, never running low on food or firewood thanks to Nathaniel's careful preparations. When the first hints of spring appeared in early March, green shoots pushing through the melting snow, they both felt the stirring of new possibilities. "We should set a date," Thea said one morning in late March as they worked together to repair the winter damage to the barn roof. "For the wedding." Nathaniel hammered in a nail before responding. "When do you want to get married?" "As soon as possible," she admitted. "I know we said spring, and it is spring now. What about May? That would give us time to prepare properly." "May sounds perfect," he said. "Should we have it in Wallace?" "In the church?" Thea considered. "Yes, I think so. I want it to be proper and official. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours." They rode into Wallace the next week to make arrangements with the circuit preacher who came through town once a month. Reverend Morrison was an elderly man with kind eyes who listened to their story without judgment. "I will be happy to marry you," he said. "The church will be available the third Sunday in May. Does that suit you?" "Perfect," Thea said, squeezing Nathaniel's hand. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Thea sewed herself a new dress, cream-colored with blue flowers embroidered on the bodice. Nathaniel bought himself a new suit from the store in Wallace, feeling awkward and constrained in the formal clothes but willing to wear them for Thea's sake. They received unexpected support from some of their neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, who had been reserved at first, warmed to them and offered to help organize a small reception after the ceremony. Other homesteaders they barely knew came by the cabin with small gifts and offers of assistance. "People are basically good," Thea said one evening after yet another neighbor had stopped by. "Sometimes I forget that." "You brought me back to people," Nathaniel said. "I had forgotten what community could be like, what it could mean." "We brought each other back," she corrected. The night before the wedding, Nathaniel stayed at the small boarding house in Wallace while Thea stayed with Mrs. Patterson. It was tradition for the bride and groom to spend the night before apart, and though Nathaniel found it silly, he honored Thea's wish to do things properly. He barely slept, his mind racing with anticipation and a strange nervousness. He was about to bind himself to another person for life, to make promises before God and community. It was not a step he had ever imagined taking, but now that the moment was here, he felt nothing but certainty. Thea was his future, his home, his heart. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, warm sunshine pouring down from a cloudless sky. Nathaniel dressed carefully in his new suit, his long hair brushed and tied back neatly. He looked at himself in the small mirror at the boarding house and barely recognized the civilized man staring back at him. The church was small and simply decorated, with wildflowers picked by the local women arranged in jars at the altar. A dozen people gathered to witness the ceremony, neighbors and townsfolk who had come to support them. Nathaniel stood at the altar with Reverend Morrison, his heart pounding as he waited for Thea to arrive. When she walked through the door on the arm of Mr. Patterson, who had agreed to give her away, Nathaniel felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, her dark hair pinned up with small white flowers woven through it, her new dress fitting her perfectly. But it was the joy on her face that struck him most, the pure happiness radiating from her as she walked toward him. They joined hands at the altar, and Nathaniel was surprised to feel his own hands shaking. Thea's were steady, her eyes locked on his as Reverend Morrison began the ceremony. The words of the service washed over him, traditional and beautiful, but Nathaniel was focused entirely on Thea. When it came time for the vows, his voice was strong and clear. I, Nathaniel Quinn, take you, Theodora Zimmerman, to be my wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as we both shall live. Thea's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her own vows, tears sliding down her cheeks. I, Theodora Zimmerman, take you, Nathaniel Quinn, to be my husband. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you. I promise to be faithful and true, to stand beside you through whatever may come, for as long as we both shall live. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Morrison said with a smile. You may kiss your bride. Nathaniel cupped Thea's face in his large hands and kissed her gently, aware of the witnesses around them but not caring. She was his wife now, bound to him before God and man, and the joy of it nearly overwhelmed him. The small reception at Mrs. Patterson's house was warm and welcoming. The women had prepared food, and someone had brought a fiddle to play music. Nathaniel found himself dancing with his new wife, holding her close as they swayed to the simple tune. Happy, he asked, looking down at her. Happier than I have ever been, she said. You, same, he admitted. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a home, a future. I thought I was meant to be alone. You were never meant to be alone, Thea said fiercely. You were meant to be mine. They left the reception in the late afternoon, riding back to their cabin as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. When they arrived, Nathaniel swept Thea up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the silliness and rightness of it. That night, they came together as husband and wife, their joining tender and passionate. Nathaniel had been with women before, brief encounters during the war that had meant little, but this was different. This was love and commitment, and it changed everything. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Thea's head on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he said, the words coming easier than he expected. More than I knew I could love anyone. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. They worked side by side, expanding the garden, improving the barn, preparing for the future. Nathaniel began work on the new house he had promised Thea, clearing land and laying the foundation. It would take time, perhaps 2 years before it was fully completed, but they had time now. They had forever. In late July, Thea began feeling ill in the mornings, and they both knew what it meant before the doctor in Wallace confirmed it. She was pregnant, their first child expected to arrive in early February. Nathaniel was terrified and elated in equal measure. He would be a father, responsible for a new life, for raising a child in this harsh country. But when he looked at Thea, at the glow of happiness on her face as she rested her hand on her still flat stomach, his fears quieted. They would figure it out together, just as they had figured out everything else. As summer turned to autumn and the aspens on the mountainsides turned gold, Thea's belly began to swell with their growing child. Nathaniel became even more protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier work. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from love rather than a belief in her weakness. They spent the evenings of that autumn planning for their growing family. They chose names, debated philosophies of child rearing, and dreamed about the future. Nathaniel carved a cradle from pine, working on it each night by lamplight while Thea knitted tiny clothes from her softest yarn. The winter arrived, their second together, but this time everything was different. They were husband and wife now, expecting their first child with a future stretching bright and clear before them. The cabin felt warmer somehow, more like a true home, and they settled into the quiet months with contentment. When Thea went into labor on a freezing February night, Nathaniel rode through the snow to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife. He paced outside the cabin for hours, listening to Thea's cries and feeling utterly helpless. When Mrs. Patterson finally emerged to tell him he had a son, he nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the cabin to find Thea exhausted but smiling, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Nathaniel approached almost reverently, looking down at the small red face of his child. The baby's eyes were closed, his tiny hands curled into fists, and Nathaniel felt love slam into him with almost physical force. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is," Thea agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Nathaniel knew. "James," he said. "After your first husband, he should be honored." Tears spilled down Thea's cheeks. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. James Zimmerman was a good man who loved you well. Our son will carry on his name and hopefully his goodness." "James Quinn," Thea said, trying it out. "I like it. James Nathaniel Quinn." They spent the rest of that winter learning to be parents, adjusting to the demands of a newborn and the way their lives had changed. Nathaniel discovered reserves of patience he did not know he possessed, walking the floor with a crying baby at all hours. Thea managed to continue her spinning, though in shorter sessions now with frequent interruptions. Spring arrived again, their third together, bringing with it new growth and new possibilities. The house Nathaniel was building was taking shape, the frame rising against the sky. Little James grew from a fragile newborn into a robust baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. One evening in May, exactly 2 years after their wedding, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. James was asleep in his cradle inside, and for the moment, they had peace and quiet. Nathaniel had his arm around Thea, and she leaned against him with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked. "Every detail," he said. "I heard you crying and thought you were dying, nearly scared me to death." She laughed softly. "I was dying in a way, dying of loneliness and fear and feeling like I could not do it anymore. And then you appeared like some kind of miracle." "I was the one who got the miracle," Nathaniel said. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more." "We saved each other," she said, "and now look at us. A family, a home, a future." "I never dared to dream of this," he admitted. "After the war, I thought I was too broken for a normal life. I thought I would live alone in the mountains until I died." "But you were not broken," Thea said. "You were just lost. We both were. And now we are found." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. The same stars that had wheeled overhead on that Christmas Eve 2 years before when they had toasted the new year, and the future they would build together. That future had arrived, bringing with it challenges and joys in equal measure, and they had met all of it side by side. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and growth. The new house was completed when James was 3. A sturdy 2-story structure with glass windows and separate bedrooms. They moved their belongings from the old cabin, which they converted into additional storage and a workshop for Nathaniel. A second child arrived, a daughter they named Sarah, and then 2 years later, another son they called Thomas. The homestead expanded to accommodate their growing family. Nathaniel built a larger barn and added sheep to their livestock, fulfilling Thea's dream of raising her own wool-producing animals. Her yarn business flourished, her reputation for quality spreading throughout the region. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning to work the land and contribute to the family's survival. James inherited his father's skill with wood and tools, while Sarah showed a talent for spinning and weaving like her mother. Little Thomas was still finding his way, but he had a quick mind and a love of books that suggested he might be the scholar of the family. Through it all, Nathaniel and Thea's love deepened and matured. The passionate romance of their early days settled into something steadier, but no less profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They still sat together in the evenings, still talked about their days and their dreams, still found moments of joy in the simple fact of being together. Nathaniel never lost his love of the mountains, and several times each summer he would take James and later Thomas up to his old cabin for a week of hunting and fishing. These trips connected his sons to the wild places that had shaped him while giving Thea time alone with Sarah to work on more delicate spinning projects and mother-daughter bonding. The town of Wallace grew around them, expanding from a rough collection of buildings into a proper town with a school, a church, and multiple stores. The Quinns became respected members of the community, known for their hard work and the quality of Thea's yarn. Nathaniel served on the town council for several years, using his mountain wisdom to help resolve disputes and plan for the town's future. As the children grew older and the 1890s arrived, the frontier was changing. The wild days were fading, replaced by more settled civilization. Railroads connected once isolated communities, and new technologies began arriving even in remote Montana. Nathaniel sometimes felt nostalgic for the wilder times, but he never regretted the choices that had led him to this life. On a summer evening in 1895, Nathaniel and Thea sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. The children were inside preparing dinner, old enough now to handle such tasks without supervision. James was 21 and courting a girl from town. Sarah was 18 and helping her mother expand the yarn business, and Thomas at 16 was talking about going to college, something unheard of in Nathaniel's youth. "We built a good life," Thea said, her hand in his. She was 42 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, but to Nathaniel, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her crying over her broken spinning wheel. "We did," he agreed. He was 46, his own hair more gray than brown now, his body bearing the marks of years of hard labor, but he was content in ways his younger self could never have imagined. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The solitary life in the mountains?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at what we have built, at our children and this home at you beside me, and I cannot imagine choosing any other path. The mountains will always be there, but this is what matters." "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. More now than ever, if that is possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple. Inside, they could hear their children laughing over something, the comfortable sounds of a family at ease with each other. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Thea asked. "When you found me crying, I asked if you were hurt. After that, you said nobody should have to cry alone in the woods. I remember. You made sure I would never have to cry alone again," she said. "You kept that promise." "And I always will," he said, pulling her closer. "For as long as I draw breath, you will never be alone." The years continued their steady march, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that life offers. They celebrated James's wedding to his sweetheart Mary, welcomed their first grandchild, a girl named Emily. They mourned when Nathaniel's hunting dog, a faithful companion of 15 years, finally passed away. They expanded the house again to accommodate visiting family members and the growing brood of grandchildren. Sarah never married, choosing instead to take over the yarn business entirely as Thea's hands grew too stiff with arthritis to spin as much as she once did. She built it into a thriving enterprise, shipping yarn as far as San Francisco and making the Quinn name synonymous with quality throughout the West. Thomas did go to college, studying law at a school in the East, but he returned to Montana to practice, unable to stay away from the mountains and family he loved. He eventually became a judge, known for his fairness and wisdom. As the new century dawned in 1900, Nathaniel and Thea found themselves in their 50s, grandparents several times over, pillars of a community that had grown up around them. The homestead that Thea had struggled to maintain alone was now a prosperous family compound, with multiple buildings and generations working together. On the anniversary of the day they met, Nathaniel took Thea to the clearing where he had first found her crying over her broken spinning wheel. The old cabin was still there, weathered but standing, now used as a storage shed. They stood together in the clearing, remembering. 22 years, Thea said wonderingly. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I would do it all again, Nathaniel said. Every moment, every challenge. It was all worth it to end up here with you. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. They taught us what we were made of, and they made the good parts even sweeter. They returned to the main house as the sun set, surrounded by their children and grandchildren for a family dinner. As Nathaniel looked around the crowded table, listening to the laughter and conversation, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been a man alone, convinced that isolation was his destiny, and then a woman's tears in the wilderness had changed everything. He had fixed her spinning wheel, but she had fixed something in him that he had not even known was broken. She had given him purpose and connection, love and family, a reason to live beyond mere survival. And in return, he had given her safety and partnership, a life where she never had to face the wilderness alone. The spinning wheel still existed, carefully preserved now as a family heirloom. It sat in Sarah's workshop, occasionally used for special projects but mostly kept as a reminder of where their family story had begun. Sometimes Nathaniel would see his daughter working at it, her hands moving with the same practiced grace her mother had once shown, and he would remember that day when he had heard crying in the woods and made the choice to stop and help. That single choice had led to everything that mattered in his life, and he would never stop being grateful that he had listened to his heart and stayed. As the evening wound down and the grandchildren were tucked into their beds, Nathaniel and Thea retired to their own room. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of decades together, and when they finally lay down, Thea curled against Nathaniel's side just as she had on their wedding night so many years before. "Good night, my love," she whispered. "Good night, my heart," he replied, holding her close. Outside, the Montana night was clear and still, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. The mountains stood silent and watchful, guardians of the life the Quinns had built in their shadow. And in the main house of the prosperous homestead, a mountain man and the woman he had found crying over a broken spinning wheel slept peacefully, surrounded by the fruits of their love and the family they had created together. Their story had begun with tears and a broken tool, with isolation and loneliness, with two wounded souls finding each other in the wilderness. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of compassion and the courage to take a chance on love, even when it seemed impossible. And as the years continued to pass, their love story became legend in the region, told and retold as an example of how life could surprise you, how love could find you even in the most unexpected places, and how sometimes the best things in life came from simply stopping to help a stranger in need. The mountain man and his bride became symbols of endurance and partnership, their decades-long marriage a beacon of hope for younger couples just starting out. They lived to see the new century truly take hold, to see automobiles on the streets of Wallace and electricity come to their home. They watched as the world transformed around them, but their love remained constant, the anchor that held them steady through all the changes. When Nathaniel finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by his family, his last words were of gratitude for the life he had lived and the woman who had shared it with him. Thea held his hand as he slipped away, her tears falling freely, but they were not tears of loneliness or despair. They were tears of love and loss, yes, but also of gratitude for the 46 years they had been granted together. She lived another 5 years after his death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a clan that bore both the Quinn and Zimmerman names with pride. And when she finally joined Nathaniel in the town cemetery on a hill overlooking the homestead they had built together, the entire town turned out to pay their respects to a woman who had embodied grace, strength, and perseverance. The homestead continued on, passed down through the generations, a living monument to what two people could build when they chose love over loneliness, partnership over isolation, and hope over despair. And somewhere in that sprawling family compound, carefully preserved in a place of honor, sat an old spinning wheel that had once been broken and then fixed by a mountain man who stopped to help a crying stranger, never knowing that simple act of kindness would change both their lives forever.